Welcome to Substance Stories. Today we're going to take a deep dive on peer support groups. We're going to talk about their strengths, their purpose, and we're going to answer some of the concerns that a lot of people have before they go to them. Today I have the pleasure of being joined by my colleague at the Victoria Clinic, Nathan Akoka, and we're going to talk about something I'm incredibly passionate about. It's peer support groups. So they are part of the famous five that I've talked about with Fergal in a previous podcast. And the famous five is the key support structure that we have to keep us in recovery. Peer support groups come in all different shapes and sizes. NA, AA, Gamblers Anonymous, there's a 12-step programs, probably the most famous, but there are lots and lots, and they are all terrific, or at least almost all of them, all terrific. Nathan, what do you think is the key strengths and purpose of a peer support group?
Yeah, so look, I am a big advocate for peer support groups. And the main reason I think is because you see people that have put in the work. And for the people I've worked with, it's just a sense of hope that things can change and life can be different beyond addiction. Life's not boring, it can be meaningful. And you see the people that have been there and done that. And that's powerful.
Big time. I think about that a lot. I think about one of the things I emphasize is it's not about abstinent. It's not about living to be abstinent. It's about being absent so you can live. And I think seeing that person just a bit further along the journey than you is really empowering, to be really inspiring. There's a wonderful book actually by I believe a Canadian psychiatrist called Addiction as an Attachment Disorder, and he writes a lot about the social connection and the lack of it that comes about from addiction. And he writes really beautifully about peer support groups in it, and he believes that it is not just the people that are further ahead of us in their peer support journey, but the journey of the group itself. And he writes he believes strongly that we grow together, and that connection of the group and will enhance our recovery journey. And even if some people in the group, like if I'm in a group and I'm exploring, I might not have the presence of mind to or the strength or the bravery to share a fear I have, but someone else in that group might share that fear, and then that's introduced into the group context, and then I can learn from it, even though I didn't share it myself, or perhaps I didn't notice that. So it's this interconnected. If we grow together as a group, we can all sort of learn together, which I thought was a really beautiful idea.
That is a beautiful idea. And you see that all the time. It's almost like, a lot of people that do come in, have a lot of relational traumas and, it's really hard to trust. And they come in with this perception of how do I trust others? And then you see this kind of synergy of people saying, I walked in here, I was full of fear. And here I am today, kind of sharing the deepest and darkest secrets and all my vulnerabilities. And then it's that synergy of, it's kind of modeling. It's like, here's a person that was where I've been. They were full of fear and they're taking that leap of faith. And that's teaching me that it's okay to take a leap of faith, right? And that's that kind of that synergy within that group dynamic.
The group dynamics, yeah, I think it's really wonderful. All right, so big common uh, issues I hear with people
Mm.
with peer support groups and things. So I think the first one is a lot of people just find a group scenario really intimidating. The idea of that as you say, that first leap of faith, that going to a group scenario, I'm going to talk about this thing that I can't talk to anyone about, to a room full of people, is huge. How do you propose people overcome that?
Look, it is a tough one, and often I'll speak to people about, what are the messages that your brain is telling you about going there? What's actually the fear? Is it the fear of saying something stupid and being judged? Just getting to understand what that fear is actually about. The next thing I say is, we talk a bit about if they get asked to share, what to say, because there are common things to say. Um, you say, hi, my name is Nathan, and I'll share by listening. That's a polite way of saying I'm not really ready to start sharing with all of you. And what will often happen from there is people that have been around will come and support you and have a bit of a chat to you. Maybe introduce you to the group, so you can build a bit of trust within the group dynamic. So maybe in another week or another 2 weeks, you might feel a bit more comfortable to share something.
And do you think it is really important that you eventually share? Like, do you think you can't be a passive member in these groups?
Yeah, there's a saying that I heard, and I think it's a bit look, it's a bit extreme, but I do think it does have some substance. So they say it's eventually if you come and you don't share, it's quite selfish because you could potentially say something that could save someone else's life. You know, so are you putting your own comfort above, I suppose, that group process and sharing something that actually might really click with someone, and it might need to, it might be what someone else really needed to hear to get through their tough time that week.
Second thing I hear a lot is, and so I guess a lot of these, which I think I should have said, I think we are currently talking quite in a concentrated manner about the 12 steps. And maybe we'll touch on probably smart recovery
Mm,
later because that's probably the second biggest group.
yeah.
Um, uh, the second thing I hear a lot is it's too overtly religious, and I have had some difficult experiences with religion in my life.
This is such a common one, and I think, that's one of the drawbacks is just the language that the 12 steps sometimes uses. But if you peel back the layers, for example, at Narcotics Anonymous NA, they overtly discuss at the beginning of a meeting, we have no ties to religion, and they call it a higher power of your own understanding. And if people are quite resistant to that, what I speak to them about is going to
Yep,
atheist meetings,
that's it.
right? But even with ones that aren't atheist meetings, they conceptualize a higher power as whatever it is beyond you. It's the concept of if you go to sleep, the world still moves on. There's forces greater than you in the world. So I tell people the group dynamic, like we were speaking about before, you can even look at the actual like the synergy of the group or the Narcotics Anonymous group itself, that kind of group conscious as a higher power, because it's around a higher power needs to be something that cares about you and has your best interest at heart. So when you're really struggling and things are happening, you can say, I feel like really using, but I'm handing over my will to a power greater than me that cares about me to look after me. And what does the group NA want me to do? It wants me to stay clean and sober. So I'm going to do the next thing that the meeting is telling me to do, or the group is telling me to do, which is call my sponsor. So if you can reconceptualize a higher power as something they can understand, so be it. Some people, it could be an old family member that had passed away. Some people, it could be whatever it is for them.
Yeah, so I think there's two great things as you're saying this. The first one, and this is what I say to everyone, is there are so many different flavors of groups. You know, NAAA Gamblers Anonymous is not like in there is atheist groups, women only groups, LGBTQI groups, overtly religious groups, men only groups. There is so, and even groups that are general and open. Different regular people go there different times, and so you got to find your sort of person, right? And it's really, I tell people, you can't just go to one meeting and say, this isn't for me, because that all you know from that is that the vibe of that meeting wasn't for you. But the vibe of the meeting three doors down is going to be completely different. The vibe of the meeting that meets in the same place on a different day of the week is going to be completely different. You've got to try lots of different groups. The second thing is, yeah, the higher power. I really like what you were saying about the higher power wanting to be, yeah, wondering what's better, because the way I've always envisioned it, in sort of thought about the higher power, and it's probably because I'm less educated than you, but it's because I guess what I've thought of is it's this it addiction is is an illness that is directly affecting our choice making capacity, if that makes sense. It is, to not get too meta, but our ability to make choices is the very thing being affected by an illness. And that means that even though we want to stop having an addiction, of course we want to stop having addiction. That's why we're seeking help for us not having an addiction. We still are having an addiction. So there is this power that is not within our power. And so that is, to me, not an overtly religious statement. That is, you know, there is a power that is not within my power. It's a higher power, and so we need to find a secondary source of that. So if you can, I often think about it sort of Freudian, right? So
Yeah.
Freudian had the id, which was this, our drives, and I think you'd firmly put the sort of hedonic pleasure-seeking addiction drive there, and then the ego, which is sort of trying to make sense of it all, and then the superego, which is our societal norms and values. And I guess the higher power there, you could just say, well, it's our superego. Well, I'm choosing to surround myself with abstinent people, so the group, as you say, or my family, my cultural values, and that's what I'm deferring to there.
100%. I think the way you said that, it's perfect because there's a saying that, our best thinking gets us there. They often say in NA and AA, it's your thinking that got you there, right? And it's that kind of disease model, right? Of it's a disease of the brain, and that kind of obsession and compulsion to keep using will keep driving you back to the same behavior. And it doesn't matter what your higher power is; it can be whatever. It's just that process of handing it over to something that cares about you. And I think that's a different concept to a lot of ways people look at religion. Often there's fear and shame-inducing kind of memories of religion for some people, and this is a whole different conceptualization of what a higher power is.
And I should also say, which is always relevant to bring up when we're talking about religion and the 12 steps, is step 11 is prayer or meditation. So there
Yes.
doesn't need to be a religious component to step 11 at all. But often people will come say that to me, but absolutely not. I meditate daily.
Yeah.
I'm not an overtly religious person. I would say I describe
Yeah.
myself. I'm meditating, not praying. That doesn't matter. Okay, other issues that people bring up with the 12 steps. NA in particular
Mm.
hates opioid agonist therapy. How do you respond to that?
It's an interesting one, and I think for some people it can make them feel a bit ashamed because they can't identify clean if they're maybe on even drug replacement. You know what I mean? But um, and it's like, well, I haven't been using, and I'm getting told, oh, they identify as, hi, my name is Nathan, I'm on drug replacement. Hypothetically, um, you know, I suppose that's just an issue with the philosophy. At the end of the day, if you can kind of get past that and just kind of, look beyond that and see the other benefits that you might be able to get out of the program, it can be quite helpful. And I always tell people that have this issue is you need to find a sponsor that has been through that, because they can talk about all their issues that, when they went through, because they're probably having the same thoughts you're having right now about the injustice of this. And I'm trying, and now I'm even getting told I'm not clean because I'm on replacement. So yeah.
That is exactly what my response, Nathan, when I get in someone that says, when I say get a new sponsor. So, because I mean, obviously, we're doing podcasts. I think that peer support, I think 12 steps are fantastic, but I think that still the official, if you go on the NA website, Australia website, they have a problem with OAT, opioid agonist therapy.
Yeah.
I think that is wrong. I think opioid
Yeah.
agonist therapy saves lives. But that's not, I've had people come in that sponsors have told them to get off mood stabilizers, and I think that is it's just a classic example of creep, of I guess of I'm going to of the creep outside your area of expertise. I'm going to a peer support group to get the wonderful things that peer support group offers, but one of the things they don't offer is medical expertise.
Mm.
All right, so so my view there would be if you've got a sponsor that is saying, hey, you need to get off your antidepressants, you need to get off your mood stabilizer, you need to get off your buprenorphine. I think I would just politely say, look, mate, I'm, thank you so much for all you're doing in my life, but I'm going to defer that part of my life to my doctor, and I'm going to defer, and we're going to, and I think that we're just going to have that boundary because I really, that's my defense. So I really think that OAT saves lives, and I think it's an issue, but hopefully, and I eventually change their mind. But again, go back to what we say. Each meeting has a different flavor. You'll absolutely find a sponsor that has gone through it, and I'm sure they will have a completely different idea.
Exactly. You need to hold those boundaries, and it's also like your sponsor isn't your psychiatrist, isn't your doctor, and also it's not your trauma therapist.
No, oh yeah,
That's another thing as well. And if your sponsor is going down a path you don't feel comfortable going down, have those conversations. And if it keeps coming back to that, maybe it's time to find a new sponsor. And most sponsors, if they're doing the work on themselves, won't feel too rejected because they understand it's not about them, it's about you getting the best recovery possible. And if that means it's with someone else, they can deal with their own emotions about that with their sponsor, right?
that's something. So the other thing I see with a lot of people that get so much out of 12 steps and then stop going eventually is that there's some sort of problem in the relationship with their sponsor. And I think we need to say, there's nothing magical about the sponsor sponsee. It's a human relationship like any other human relationships, and they can be very strong. We can drift apart from people. That's not something I see people often will sort of underassert themselves in a sponsor-sponsee relationship where they'll sort of go down a path that they don't really want to do, but they feel obligated to because it's their sponsor. They've been together for so long, they've achieved recovery. I think that's having that boundaries in that relationship, like you would have in any relationship, is actually healthy for the both of you.
Of course, totally agree.
Uh, so next, next one, this is a trickier one, Nathan. I've met a lot of people that have stopped going because, and I won't say so. 13 stepping is a concept where it's generally it's very clear that you should not have a you should not sponsor someone who is of the opposite gender of you, presumably if you are heterosexual, right? So 13 stepping refers to that, and it's typically older men with younger female sponsors. But I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about the 12-step program can be quite some meetings can be quite uh, can be quite a social scene with romance. And I've actually had people that have stopped going because they've settled down and they felt it was too they wanted to sort of separate themselves from the romantic aspect of the group because they loved their new partner and they didn't want to cheat on their new partner. How do you have you encountered this before, Nathan? How do you respond to it?
Yes, look, it is definitely a very common thing, and but as you probably know, Rich, you take away a coping strategy like a substance,
Mm.
other coping strategies surface, and often for people, that's that validation of you know validation from the opposite sex, and sex itself, right? Those are common coping strategies, right? And it feels pretty good,
Absolutely.
especially if you're
Absolutely.
trying to become abstinent and you're getting this validation. It's like, yeah, great. Here's this transformation. I would say to those people, if you feel like that's taking over and that's blurring the lines of why you're coming to these meetings, go to a all men's meeting or an all women's meeting. And I often say that to people where we work, Rich. At the clinic, I say to people, these vulnerable women that often are highly traumatized, and have relational trauma for men. I think the best thing for you is to go find a really strong female group, where there's a bunch of women that can really settle down, like, kind of shield you and take you under their wing and guide you through the program. So you don't have to worry about all that other stuff.
The exact advice I give,
Yeah.
Nathan. I said, "Yes, great. Find a men's only group. This is the solution to your problem with you with that you have with the partner." And I
Yeah.
think for women, I actually think women group only groups are absolutely. I mean, it's fantastic. And obviously, trauma and addiction are so tied together that a lot of patients that we treat have had some pretty awful trauma that leads them to be more anxious around members of the opposite sex, and of course, it's such a vulnerable thing
Mm.
going to a group. And I actually think that also explains some of the sort of promiscuity we see in the groups is that if I'm being so vulnerable, I'm so out there that to have someone affirm my vulnerability physically, I think is a very powerful thing. So I think any situation where we're asking ourselves to be so vulnerable publicly is going to inevitably lead to more more sex. It would be my
Yeah.
view. um,
100%.
um, Okay, and finally, getting to the end of my list of common problems that people come to me about with 12 step, and the last one is, it was great for me. I've achieved abstinence, and I was going to 10, 15 groups a week. 15 groups a week is ridiculous. No one goes to 10 groups a week.
Yeah.
Lunch and evening. Um, but I need to, I'm back at work now, which is absolutely a goal. Uh, I'm 2 years abstinence. I've got friends and family. I'm going to bow out because this is just is too much. How do you respond to that?
Yeah. Look, it's an interesting one, and it does happen quite a lot. And there's this saying in NA and AA, and I don't know if it's um, I think part of it is kind of correct. But there's a saying that anything you put before your recovery, you'll kind of lose. You know what I mean? Um, and I would say to those people, look, if that's something you want to try, maybe you can try, but I'd be keeping a close look at behaviors that start coming up. And it's around not going to these meetings because you have to. The people that I see that have the most meaningful and rich and rich, meaningful lives keep going to NA because of what they get out of it. I'm not going because I want to be sober, or because there's that concept of a dry drunk, which is a person that's not drinking, but they're just difficult to be around and they're miserable. But
Mm.
if you keep
They
going to
still haven't
the
gotten used to being
yeah,
sitting with their sober self. I would say
yeah,
they're still looking for something to run away from. They're
yeah.
just not using alcohol.
Correct. And it's reframing of I don't need to go to these meetings to stay sober or clean if that's what they're thinking, but it's more I need to keep going here if I want to keep building them upon myself, because I feel like, often for most human beings, the work never stops. And I think it's really important to always look at how we can better improve our kind of, our own mental state or our own spirituality, whatever that looks like. And through NA, maybe you can peel it back a bit. But I think, yeah, fully stopping, it can be quite tough for a lot of people. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree, Nathan. So I'll go back to what we discussed in a previous episode, which was that um, yeah, the sort of the Durkheim sick role, which is when we take on a sociological role of having an illness like addiction. It's not our fault for having the illness, and we don't have to work. And when we're sick, we don't have to work and go to school and that sort of thing. But we have those are our rights. We have responsibilities, and our responsibilities are to listen to the advice of medical experts. And the second one is to try and get better, right? And my view with addiction is it is never our fault if we have a relapse. It is never our fault if we are seeking the substance, because that is the condition. But it is our responsibility to be seeking help. And even if we are in recovery, I think we should still uh, engage in the activities that we know help us. And I think a peer support group is one of those. I fully get, and so many people say, especially early in recovery, 90 and 90, or even more so early in recovery, you're going to need more support, right? That makes complete sense. But I don't think that anyone's life is busy enough that you can't make one meeting a fortnight, or maybe you've got a ridiculous job and so you can only make it once a month or something. But I think giving up the meetings completely is a terrible idea. I think it's part of your responsibilities to make sure that you're abstinent. Um, and I think that it's we talk a lot about NA talks a lot about seemingly irrelevant decisions, right? Or we talk in the Victoria Clinic a lot about leaving that door slightly open. And I think saying, I've outgrown this, I don't need it anymore. It might be that you've outgrown your meeting. It might be that you're thinking, oh, look, I'm now in my 30s. I was going to this meeting in my 20s. It hasn't really aged with me. It's,
Yeah.
it's in the middle of the city and it's all younger people. I want to find one, I'm now like a dad and I want to find, yeah, absolutely. But I think leaving the program completely, leaving a peer support group completely is a terrible idea. And I like what you're saying, Nathan, about continuing to grow. There's this adage in psychology, which is people come for the crisis, but grow when it's over. And I think that's true. When we're in crisis, we're not actually going to improve at all, right? So when we're in early recovery, I mean, obviously we're going to improve there, but it's just about stabilizing. It's just about not falling down. While when we're in a mental health crisis, we're in an addiction crisis. It's just about trying to keep our head above the water. But the longer we are with our sober selves, or in a mental health perspective, the longer we are seeing a therapist away from a mental, that's when we can explore all the stuff that led to us, and that's where we get the real work done. Right? So I think the idea of continuing that relationship with the peer support lifelong is really important. But as I said, yeah, sometimes you need to change meetings and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Sorry, I cut you off.
No, that's right. And I was just gonna add to that, like, if I can briefly, and like I like what you're saying as well, because you can't learn to swim when you're drowning, and that's the beginning, right? You're just trying to
Mm,
stabilize, and then you can learn to flourish. But the thing I tell people is, they're like, "Oh yeah, look, I've gone to meetings for a bit, and I'm feeling good, and I've got a really good close family around me that love me, mum, dad, a partner, got really close friends." The thing I explain to them is though, when let's say hypothetically you ever get triggered and you're like, "Oh, I'm feeling a bit triggered at the moment," or "Things have been really tough and I'm having this urge to use," right? Even though you don't want to, but you say that thinking these people are going to support you, they might love, like obviously they will love you, but is there a response helpful? And often what happens with a lot of people, because they care about you, they don't want you to use, "Oh my God, are you okay? What's going on? What are you going to use?" And they start freaking out. And that's going to make you feel this kind of shame and um, want to withdraw, right? And
absolutely.
I think the power of these meetings, and it doesn't matter what peer group it is, you can go to these people and they're not going to meet you with anxiety. They're going to be like, "That's the normal part of the process. That happened for me. Let's have a conversation." Where withdrawing from and cutting those kind of connections off, it's going to be a lot harder. And often the people that will meet you with these kind of, they're trying to be helpful, can often breed a lot of shame about a normal response in recovery.
Absolutely. I think this is yeah, I think that's another example we were talking about before about the sponsor potentially giving you medical advice. I think this is when people rely on friends and family is another example of boundary shifting, right?
Yeah.
Your friends and family. are not your peers, cannot offer what a peer support group can offer. And the classic example of this, right? And we've talked on a previous episode about what a family can do when we're in addiction, and the support they can provide, but they can't be our psychotherapist. They can't be our sponsor, right? And the classic example is when we're in an addiction, right? It's constantly compartmentalizing ourselves. We're constantly sneaking and hiding things from our loved ones, right? So to then pretend that our relationship somehow going to change, and we're going to be able to be honest with our loved ones. Well, there's a reason we do it, as you say, because they're going to be concerned. They can't give us that. They've not been through it, and they can't be that impartial view, right? There's a reason our sponsor is different from our family, because our family don't have that impartiality. They don't have the expertise. They don't have the lived experience. Their role is not to keep us sober, right? There are friends and family are who we are being abstinent to live with. That's the reward of abstinence, is having this great relationship with our friends and family and having meaning and purpose in our life. They aren't if we ask them to take on the role of sponsor, I only see it ending in disaster. I really, really try to emphasize that it's not their job to do that.
Yeah, there's a saying an old colleague used to say to me, which just resonates, is intention versus impact. Their intentions are always great. However, the impact is often very unhelpful and can breed a lot of shame. And what do people do when they feel shame? Often it goes back to wanting to use more because it takes away that pain, right?
Absolutely. So we talk about this a lot. In my view, it was not my view, it's George Koob's view, who's a
Yeah.
fantastic neuroscientist, but
Yeah.
let's call it my view,
Yeah.
uh, is that addiction is when we go from doing something from going something to have a good time to going something to not have a bad time.
Yeah.
And that's to say anything that is making us not have a bad time, um, is going to feed our addiction.
Yeah.
So anything shame, pain,
Yeah.
anything like that, I think is feeding our addiction. So my first thing when someone tells me they've had a relapse is fantastic. Thank you for reaching out to me. Let's work out a way to get you sober. Like I really, and I think people often say, oh, I'm really surprised, or I'm really glad to hear. I thought you would be disappointed in me. I thought you'd be ashamed of me. And I say, absolutely not. I think relapse is a part of the journey. We can learn from them, and we can grow together with them. Right. I think we need to get we need to get used to, we need to removing the shame from addiction is so important, because it just feeds it, right? So we need to view it like it's any other medical illness. You'd never, if a diabetic had a hypoglycemic episode, they wouldn't feel shame and disgust over themselves uh, like someone would, with an addiction does. So it's not helpful. It feeds our addiction. Uh, so Nathan,
Yeah.
we've talked about the 12 steps quite a bit.
Mhm.
And I just want to list through some other ones, because there are some great ones. And then I want to talk about SMART. So celebrate recovery. Have you ever heard about celebrate recovery?
Briefly, but I'm not very I'm not very, very familiar with it. Yeah. Tell me a bit.
You basically don't get them in Australia.
Yeah.
But it's this fantastic thing. It's in sort of Baptist fundamentalist Christian churches in the US. They were unable to talk about addiction, so they made it's quite overtly Baptist Christian, I believe,
Right.
and it's really brought that community able to talk about addiction. So it's essentially it's a sort of more overtly Christian recovery. There is life secular ring recovery, which is an overtly atheistic
Yeah.
12 steps essentially. There is women for sobriety. Women for sobriety is a women only AA. Interesting thing about women for sobriety is something about 90% of the people that go to women for sobriety also go to AA. So people use it usually as an addendum.
Nice.
Um, there is a refuge recovery, which is a sort of Buddhist inspired program. And then there are lots of smaller ones. So Fergal, who's a frequent guest on this podcast, runs his own group, the Fergal's only. Like I don't know what it's called, but it's not franchised, so to
Yeah.
speak. There's one of them. There's Jews in Recovery in Melbourne, and I believe they've got several around the world. There's a few for-profit ones. I have a kind of issue with for-profit ones. I don't know about you.
Mm.
I But there are a couple that a few of my patients go to and seem to enjoy. But I don't know if I can get quite on board with the concept of a for-profit peer support group.
Yeah, I think, if there's ones out there that the only money is around maintaining the group itself, things like AA and NA are out there for free for you to go to, then what benefits are going to these ones? What is the benefit of going to these ones? I know I also feel quite funny about them as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think as soon as you put in money, there'll eventually be a moral hazard. You know,
Yes.
is this in the best interest of the people going, or is this anyway? But the second main
Mm.
one that I think we need to talk about in depth, and I know you know a lot about, is smart recovery. So smart, people often get smart recovery confused with smart goal setting, which is a completely different thing.
Yep.
So smart recovery stands for self-managed and recovery training. Tell us a bit about smart recovery.
Look, so smart recovery is often run by a person that's been trained. You know, you got either maybe a clinician from an organization running it as a facilitator, or you'd have a peer mentor that's been trained in a model, which is the SMART model. And it's really based on, cognitive and behavioral techniques, so like CBT techniques, and a bit of motivational interviewing. And it's a very, very prescriptive format. And what I explain to people is, it's a very different function to NA and AA, where this one is a lot of it is around skills and um, goal setting. So the function of it is that, and it also actually limits your ability to form a bit of a it limits your ability to form a recovery network within smart recovery. It's all about managing it on your own. They discourage contacting people outside of the group and getting a sponsor within the group. They discourage that. So
Yeah,
the
that
function
have
is very
sponsors.
different. However,
Mm.
it's very good for people that are early in recovery. They want to get really good skills, and they want people to challenge their ideas, because you don't get that. You don't get, I suppose, that aspect in NA and AA. You're sharing your experience. You're sharing on a concept in NA and AA, where smart recovery is, here's a goal I have. This is what I'm thinking, and then you have a group kind of challenging you on that. And it's that analogy of people might, it's like a bowl of fruit that gets passed around. Everyone will put a piece of fruit in the basket, and it's up to you whether you want to take a piece of that fruit out and consume it. So people will offer you advice. Oh, do you think it's a really good idea if you're trying to stay sober to go to this wedding this week? Um, yeah. What do you think you might need to do? Do you think you might need to have um, do you think you might need to have a support person? Like, people will offer you things to help you reformulate your kind of goals, right? And people and the I suppose facilitator might use some motivational interviewing to get you there as well.
Yeah, so I think and I think it is a very different concept. I think one of the things is also it's certainly not mutually exclusive. Right? You can absolutely go to
Yeah,
both. One of the bummers about smart recovery is certainly post COVID, very few places have gone back in person. It's mostly online, which I think does really remove a lot of the peer support nature you got from it. But I think there is, even though is different, and it's certainly not the same. It doesn't cultivate the same community as AA is overtly doing. I think if you are going to a group in person regularly, you will have similar benefits, not the same. Obviously, there's no sponsor, but similar in terms of the group dynamic and what we heard about with the advantages of the peer support nature of maturing together as a group and growing together. I think for a lot of people, uh, I think they're not at a stage where they just find a 12-step program too intimidating. That the social aspect of it, especially people with severe social anxiety, or as we talked about trauma. And I think Smart's a great uh, first step. You know, so try this. This is, you're going to get used to the peer environment, and then maybe we'll talk about that later. I'm a big fan of Smart, and you say absolutely. I mean, you have to be accredited, and you have to do a course, and I actually think that course costs money, but I think it's relatively easy to get a scholarship.
yeah,
But yeah, no, it's I think smart recovery is a pretty great thing. Unfortunately, they're just in Australia at least. There's very few that aren't online, which is a
yeah.
real
I remember I used to run one, facilitate a men's only one through Task Force. It's a drug and alcohol organization in Bentley, which is now turned into Windana. Um, Back then, so I ran the men's only one, and we used to have some men that had, heard some things about AA that they were a bit kind of skeptical about, or they tried it in the past and they kind of disengaged. So sometimes people would come there, and their goal would be maybe to try go back to go back to NA, because they had some fear, and then the group kind of challenged them around that fear, and then eventually their goal was, okay, my goal for Smart Recovery this week is to try NA again or try AA again. And like you said, it's that group dynamic. And even though we say, yeah, it's self-management and, you don't all sponsor each other, humans are humans, people are people, they still connect afterwards, they go for coffee afterwards. We still give them the spiel of, that's what knowledge is about, but they do that and they get benefits from that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think also it's worth noting that smart recovery does not, unlike NA or AA or any 12 step, you can go to smart recovery not with the idea of overtly seeking abstinence. So,
Yes.
and I think that's where the motivational interview ties in, because obviously my view would be that anyone with an addiction should be aiming for abstinence, but this is not where an AA would have more of a problem with that. You're able to talk about that in smart recovery. And there is actually in the US a peer support group called Moderation Management, which is overtly not for recovery as well. I think it sort of ties into the sort of sober curious movement. But we've gotten quite off topic there.
Yep.
Nathan, thank you very much. This was a tour de force. It was I think triple the size of our normal podcast, but hopefully I think we covered a lot. And if people that are out there that are thinking about going to a peer support group, hopefully we've pushed them over the line today.
Hope so. Thank you, Rich.
No worries. Thanks so much for joining.
Have a good night.